I'm Babak Zarin. My co-presenter is Caitlin Hodges. Welcome to our presentation, Don't Frame the Braille, When Good Librarians Go Inaccessible. It's going to be hopefully a good time for us all, and hopefully you will gain a lot from it. Caitlin, if you could go to the next slide. A brief disclaimer, though, before we begin. This presentation does, in fact, discuss real-world examples of inaccessibility. We're not making up anything in this presentation. Because of that, there is going to be resemblances to actual events or locales. Those involved have been anonymized where possible. Please do not emulate the examples discussed. There will be times in the presentation where we will give advice about things you might want to do, but the examples are going to be things you really do not want to do. Next slide. So to get us started, let's talk about getting into the library itself. I know not many librarians have control over handicapped parking, which is why we're not necessarily starting there. If you do, the general rule of thumb is please keep the parking space wide enough for a car to go in and keep it fairly close to the entrance. But I wanted to start off by showing sort of 5 examples of how to, well, as you can see, not let people in. So the ramps that are currently on the slide, we have a ramp that goes directly into a set of stairs. We have a ramp that has a telephone pole kind of planted squarely in the middle of it. We have a ramp that is blocked by a set of stairs just to get on. We have one that's been incorporated into a set of stairs, but the incline is very high and could cause someone to roll backwards. And then my personal favorite, the last one, is a kind of S-shaped, variously inclined ramp that goes straight into a closed door, right next to the open door of the actual spot. All of them have fairly rough materials. The pavement is not necessarily the greatest. Many don't have guardrails sort of next to them. All of these are problems. It makes it very difficult for people to physically get into the building. The wheels on a wheelchair may not be able to roll over some of this. Definitely not through the telephone pole. Even if they are going up, the lack of guard railings can mean they can easily fall back, fall off to the side, plummet to immediate pain. Generally not the way you want to go at all. Next slide, please. Related, though, is signage. So you'll notice that there was no signs connected to any of those ramps getting into the building. But if you do get in, signage becomes a big topic for this. And you have 3 examples currently on the slide. We have from the left a sign that says, "Cries carrying the library. For the courtesy of those studying around you, please relocate to the stairwell if you wish to sob audibly," next to a picture of a wolf howling on top of like a large rock. We have an example from, I believe, the Dewey Decimal world of, a sort of chess knight with a paintbrush and then the phrase 700 arts and recreation underneath it. And then to the far right, we have a sign for a stairwell that says N, stair N, a little bit of brailing on it. The whole sign, though, has been framed in transparent concealer. You can kind of see the outline of it if you look carefully. The problem with all of these signs are it relies on you basically having vision and knowing English, right? So if you, starting with the sign on the left, if you don't know English, a wolf howling is not going to explain the message of the sign. There's no brailing on this, so if you aren't visual, you don't see this sign at all. The middle sign, and I know Kaitlyn a little bit in her part of the presentation will go more in depth with it, has not the greatest contrast. It's white lettering on a yellow background, which is very hard to see. And again, there's a bit of a disconnection. Not everyone may think of painting and chess when they think of arts and recreation. So you again have this sort of disconnect there. Again, no brailing on this sign either. So if you aren't visual, you have no way of finding it. And then the sign on the right, it has Braille, but since the framing has been placed over it, you can't feel anything. And if you don't speak English, you again would have no way of knowing what else is on this sign. There is no photo on this one. I'll also add, before we go to the next slide, the crying in the stairwell has additional inaccessibility issues depending on your library's setup. A stairwell may soon, it can bother pretty much everybody and cause sensory overload issues as well. Next slide, please. And then sort of the physical movement of the space. If you manage to get these signs in order and you manage to get everyone in, you still have a few issues physically moving through. So from the left side of the slide, you can see a ruler has been placed on sort of a step stool to measure out the width of sort of an alley between two bookshelves. The width is about 28 inches, which is way too narrow. This prevents most forms of mobility going through other than walking. And even then, if you have crutches or a cane, it's really tight. And it's definitely not a two-person walking through situation, which causes a lot of issues. You also, sort of in the bottom of the slide, have a picture of a set of bookcases with oversized books that have been flat on the bookshelves. This is fairly common for large print in particular, but the difficulty is, again, the narrowing. It makes it really hard to walk through these shelves. Also, if you're in a wheelchair, these books are at face level, which means you run a risk of being actually hit in the face with one of these as you're moving, which is rather painful and probably not what you'd like visitors to have as they go through your library. And then the large picture on the right, which we have, again, anonymized as much as we can, but I will freely say, if you look up library and accessibility, this picture will come up. In addition to having all of the issues we've discussed so far in terms of being kind of narrow, not having a lot of walking space, a lot of moving space, having very little in the way of signage, little in the way of accessibility, it also happens to be the case that this particular library provides no other alternative way to get to any of those shelves other than the stairs. There's no escalator, there's no elevator, there's no entry at all, which means that for anyone who is disabled, at least in those methods, they have to know ahead of time exactly the item they want so that they can tell the librarian at the front, who now gets to basically endorse sort of quote unquote fetch quest approach, where they have to go into the stacks, grab that item, and bring it back to the person, which again cuts off a lot of browsing and brings a lot of privacy concerns with it. So in general, these are all the ways that people have messed this up. The recommendations for not doing this is basically keep things kind of wide, keep them open. If you have signs up, please have them, very clearly connected to brailing, audio cues. Any picture should be very clear, connected to the text. Multiple languages is great. That's sort of the general overview of the physical space. I'll now hand it over to Kaitlyn to take over for digital and training.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kaitlyn Hodges. I'm with the Virginia Beach Public Library, their Disability Services Librarian, and I'm going to talk about, like he said, programming and training. To start out, I would like to say that one problem I've noticed a lot is libraries not providing their customers the opportunity to request accommodations ahead of time when it comes to a program or a training. It's very important that when you're hosting an event, whether it be virtual or in person, that you have an accommodation statement present. And with that accommodation statement, it needs to be everywhere, like on the promotional materials, on the registration page, any PR you send out, social media. It needs to be known that your library accepts accommodation requests and has a clear structure on how to handle them and make the accommodations. So you really also ought to put who to contact, a phone number to call, an email to send it to, just so someone is held responsible and needs to follow up with those requests. Kind of talking about having that accommodation request on the registration, it's also very important to make sure that the registration is accessible. A lot of these, just registration portals aren't always the most accessible to people who use screen readers particularly. They need to be able to navigate to the page, whether it be going in through your library calendar or you providing a direct link to the registration. They need to get there, and then once they're there, they need to actually fill out the form and then be able to submit it well. That means you need to have all the edit fields marked where people can type in their answers, like their contact information, everything like that that you require. And it's always a good idea to have your accommodation statement in the registration itself, or even have questions in the registration saying, will you require additional accommodations? If so, explain, like with a blank. I've noticed, as someone who has a disability, I and pretty much everyone I've noticed don't mind letting people know what we need if given the opportunity. Another thing that's really important is a lot of times libraries don't give handouts or slides ahead of time to participants. If your participants register, which not always is registration required. Babak and I just worked on an event, a virtual event, that we just decided to ditch the registration altogether because we wanted to make sure that it was an accessible event for anybody, whether it be people using screen readers or people who just don't have the tech savviness to register for an event and go through the process. So, I mean, you could always do away with registration altogether, but if you provide registration and you have their contact information, you can send the materials out ahead of time, whether it be the PowerPoint slides or the handouts. If somebody makes an accommodation request, sometimes that's going to be on the request to provide the materials ahead of time, so that people who are blind or low vision can review them before the event. Because when doing an event like this, the screen reader is not gonna pick up every slide when you're sharing your screen. And even if it did, it'd be really distracting trying to listen to the presenter as well as your computer talking to you. So that's a really good thing to start doing, is sending it out ahead of time. I've also noticed that a lot of times people fail to provide audio descriptions of the images and pictures on the slide. Like a couple seconds ago, Babak, when he was going through the slides, he was telling you exactly what was in each slide during our virtual presentation, so that someone who wasn't able to see it would know what he was talking about. I've also noticed that a lot of times when planning a presentation or planning a training or program, a lot of times people only appeal to one learning style. So the way to get around that would be to provide the slides ahead of time so that they could be read, or provide them during the presentation, read the slides aloud. That would cover people who are auditory and visual learners. Now, obviously with virtual programs, it's a little bit hard to include the touch aspect. If any of y'all have ideas or have done that, that's fantastic. But in person, if you can add that, that for kinesthetic learners, that would be fantastic, just to drive home what you're trying to get across to participants. Continuing on with programming and training, it's very important to use a digital platform with a call-in option. Most of the digital platforms right now have that, but just when you're planning beforehand, double check to make sure that that option is available. This really helps people who are pretty low tech. I mean, they can call in with their landline, and it also helps people who have difficulty getting into any kind of program with a screen reader. Sometimes it can be tricky. Like I said, a lot of times there's many different steps, and everything's got to, you know, fall into place, and you know, you need to be very tech savvy to make it happen. So providing trainings that can be call in is really beneficial to everybody. A lot of times trainings programs don't provide closed captions like what's being provided right now. That's really important to people who are deaf or hard of hearing, as well as transcripts or offering a sign language interpreter. The interpreter is very beneficial when you have in-person training, because obviously you can't have closed captions if you're in person. But I've actually been to a training that had a sign language interpreter there along with the closed captions. So that just was fantastic because it covered like all the bases of accessibility, which was wonderful. And finally, I've personally experienced this when materials are provided in only one format. That is extremely problematic. I've been to an in-person training where I sat down with and the instructor had known me for years, and they passed out a piece of paper with 8-point font. I'm low vision. I couldn't see the paper at all. So what would have been beneficial would have been sending that document to me ahead of time, so that I could have made the edits necessary for me to equally participate in the program. That way I could have made it the appropriate font, the appropriate style, everything I needed to participate equally. But that didn't happen. Even if you're having an in-person training, it's even great to offer training materials in Braille if you could. If doing a virtual training, I highly recommend sending out the materials in a Word version, a Word document. PDFs don't typically do very well with screen readers. A lot of times they just don't pick up the text. So if you still want to send a PDF, send it both. Send a PDF and a Word version, because if the attendee uses a screen reader of any kind, it's just a much safer bet to use the Word version. So for text and slide accessibility, the things that I have seen way too many times are very small print text, lack of serif contrast, lack of alternative text, poor use of space, lack of color contrast, and using your own PowerPoint template. A lot of these go without saying. Text should be large and easy to read. As far as serif versus sans serif fonts, it's always best to use sans serif fonts because they don't have that extra like curly Q, extra lines, anything like that. It's just easier to read if it's just clearly the letter. Lack of alternative text, that is if you're sending the PowerPoint or any kind of document ahead of time, you need to embed that text to describe the images. if they're there to convey meaning of any kind. I'll show you kind of a good example of alt text, but long story short, if you don't have alt text, screen readers are just going to say either picture or image, or they're not going to be able to tell the person on the other end of the computer what they should be seeing. As far as spacing goes, just make sure it's clear. Don't have, you know, everything jam packed. Make it easy for people to hold their place on your slide, handout, any of that. Color contrast, Babak touched on that a little bit earlier. Don't do a yellow background with white writing like that one, or a white background with yellow writing. It really strains the eyes. And there's a lot of other, you know, color contrast that just shouldn't happen that do a lot of times. And you can look that up and see what are good contrasts, what aren't. You can even run it through an accessibility checker, and it'll tell you if your colors are a good enough contrast. And lastly, using your own PowerPoint template. If you are sending the materials out to your attendees, don't use a template that you created. Reason being is screen readers, the pre-formatted templates, screen readers know how to read. They know what order to go. If you create your own template, they're liable to bounce around and not read in the order that you actually wanted it to be read. And here's the examples of good contrasts, bad contrasts, serif versus sans serif fonts, and then alt text. If you don't, if you have questions, you know, you could always just ask someone who uses a screen reader. There have been many times that I've had coworkers who use screen readers just be like, okay, can you access this? Does this read like I'm wanting it to read? So most of the time people are willing to help if you just ask. Okay, the last really big chunk we're going to talk about is customer interaction. When you're speaking or talking to people who have a disability, um, a lot of times people like kind of talk around the subject, don't get to the point, aren't clear or concise. That you should be clear and concise. If you're giving directions to someone, definitely be clear and concise and descriptive about how to find something, how to do something. It's just better for everybody all around, not just people with a disability, but especially those with a disability will appreciate it. Also, this happens way too much too. People raising their voice regardless of the disability. Just because someone is blind does not mean they are also deaf. And just because someone has an intellectual disability does not mean that they're deaf or that they're dumb. So, when speaking to someone who has a disability, talk to them like you would just about anybody else that you have an interaction with, other than just being clear and concise, which is something you should be doing no matter what. They're people too, and they expect to be treated with dignity just like everyone else. And kind of going with the treating with dignity, um, I've seen it happen a lot where people talk to the person with the disability's companion or whoever they bring in with them about that customer's needs, not to the customer directly. Um, that's not good practice. Um, the customer knows their needs more than anyone else, even the person that they brought with them. And they deserve to be addressed and asked what their needs and what their expectations are. And it's really rude to talk about somebody when they're standing right there instead of talking to them directly. A little bit more on this. there's a lot of, I've noticed a big issue with people thinking they know best or possibly ignoring accommodation requests. The person with the disability knows best what they need. Even though we're librarians and we're very, very educated, it doesn't always mean that we know what they need and that we don't need to make assumptions of any kind about their needs, what they can and can't do. A lot of times you'll be surprised about what someone can do. So don't ever make those assumptions. Similarly, don't be afraid to ask them what they need or for clarification. Like I said earlier, as someone with a disability, I have zero problem telling somebody, you know, my needs, how I can be helped, or when I don't need help, when I've got this. Also patronizing, infantilizing, or treating people with disabilities in any way differently than your other customers is just really not okay. A lot of times I know it's not intentional. We're librarians. We don't mean to do any of these things. Like, we want everybody to feel welcome, but sometimes it just happens. And just being cognizant is half the battle, and knowing when you're slipping into that pattern and just doing better next time. And finally, not including their needs proactively in planning. Whenever planning an event, it's always good to think about all the people that might be able to or might want to attend and all of their needs. And when designing it, taking those needs into account. A lot of times you'll see that those modifications that you did actually benefit people as a whole, like providing materials in different formats, like appealing to different learning styles. It helps everyone in the long run. It's just the main thing is thinking about it and taking that into account. Um, Basically, anyone in the public, you know, is welcome to come to most programs, and you need to think about like the public and what they might need. I feel like the biggest thing, and I've noticed like this, I think applies to the entire presentation overall. Most of this could really be avoided if people just took the time to think ahead of time. Like a lot of those physical spaces, if someone just sat down and really thought, not from a like design aspect, but thought more from a usability aspect, they probably could have been avoided, as well as the different things I've discussed with trainings and programs and all of that. It's just, if you sit down and think about all the possibilities and the needs and how you could make something better for everyone, that could avoid a whole lot of this. So ultimately, that is the end of our presentation, and we are happy to take any questions you may have. We ended a little bit early. Sorry about that.
That's fine. What questions do we have from participants?
Hello. You mentioned about the fund. You mentioned about the sans serif, those fund. I personally am not very familiar with those. Do you think you can elaborate a little bit more when we do signage in this area, the best practice?
Sans serif fonts are fonts that do not have like added curly cues. They don't have the added lines. An example of a serif font that gets used a whole lot is Times New Roman. So my thing would be, if you could eliminate that and use a font such as Arial, Verdana. There are a lot of sans serif options out there. I just perform a search and see, you know, which ones are sans serif. I create pretty much everything with Arial or Verdana personally, because I just like the look and I just feel it looks clean and easily readable. So
I'll echo that. Arial is very popular as a sans serif, and Times New Roman is a popular example of a serif. One other additional font to consider, which I believe is also sans serif, I'd have to check, oddly enough, would be Comic Sans. It is one of the fonts that those who have dyslexia find easier to work with. But a lot of the font listings can be found online. The terms themselves just refer to sort of the shape of the font. Serifs generally have smaller, I mean, curls is the way I think they normally describe it, but like a lot smaller bends, smaller details built into them, where sans serifs tend to be very straight lines and clean cut letters.
We've got a couple of questions in the chat here. You mentioned accessibility checkers. Do you have any recommendations for good checkers to use?
I think, I'm pretty sure, well, you can do a Google search and find free accessibility checkers, but one is going to the website for the web content, WCAG web content accessibility guidelines, I think, and they go into a little more detail. I think they have recommendations for that as well.
They have a list of recommendations. It really depends on what specific type of checker you are looking for, because they have made a ton of them. The one that I would recommend, which I can, I guess, type the URL for it into the chat, is the Wave Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool. I believe that should be the URL now in the chat. It's a fairly easy, it's a suite of different tools. There's some browser extensions as well. And what it allows you to do is to pull up a website or part of your website and run it over it, and it will then give you a report back of things that it finds to be an issue or a problem on the page. Now I'll say in advance, as Kaitlyn kind of mentioned, the ones that come up a lot are missing alt text, missing descriptions for pictures, and broken links, awkward navigation across websites. I have yet to hear a strong rule of thumb for how to deal with navigation across websites. I have heard that the ideal is to make it so that you can find whatever your library deems to be the most important stuff in under 3 clicks. And yes, clicking on a toolbar at the top to pull the drop-down menu counts as 1 click. That may be a bit hardcore for a lot of systems to try, though.
More questions in the chat. How does someone with low vision or a blind person know that there is a sign that they should be aware of? Is there a way to make an accessible option for signs altogether?
So I know Kaitlyn will be able to go way more in depth than me with this. I can say that first, someone with low vision or blindness, they are very rarely complete, total pitch black, I see nothing, even shades blind. More common tends to be, I see very large blurs. I can see the outline of something, maybe. So one way they know is there seems to be a large rectangle that is prominently in front of them, and they have no idea what's on it, but by the fact that there's a large rectangle that is in front of them, there must be something on it or it would not be there. That's one way. Another, which is sort of the accessibility pro way, is to pair it with some form of sound, some form of tactile touch thing. You know, if I hear a beep go off, that's an indication that there must be something around me that is telling me that I've crossed, for example, a line of some kind to make the beep. And that can prompt a, is there something I should be looking at as well?
And there's also the possibility of having like a tactile sign, or, and I've heard might be the San Francisco Public Library, I can't remember vaguely, but they have a tactile map of their library. So like if somebody comes in, you could, that's blind, they can feel how to get different places within the library. And it could say, you know, where the signs are, where you can go to read them. There's also, this is also going into another whole thing, but there's also the possibility of adding your library, if you really want to a wayfinding app. There are some new apps that you can use that will navigate you through buildings, such as Ira. Like I think it's also San Francisco. I think they have a partnership with Ira, which is a service that people can call, and they'll tell you, you know, how to get through the building for free. So there's many different creative solutions. A low-tech solution would be to have the sign available, have it in Braille, and have somebody actually tell them where it is and where they can read it.
Okay. Several more questions here in the chat. How are you shelving your Braille books?
Carefully. I assume by Braille books, you mean books that have been brailled and not books about Braille. Books that have been brailled, for those who have never seen them, they tend to be fairly, some of them at least can be very large. They tend to be larger than the unbrailled versions. And so what I have seen libraries do is they either try to create a sort of Braille section with the Braille books sort of listed there as a specialty collection, or they will incorporate it into their regular shelves just with like an additional, this is a brailled item label of some kind.
Okay.
We just shelve our, well, we have what's called twin vision books, and we just shelve them similarly to any other Braille books. They're primarily kids books, so they're not these giant volumes of Braille like you would think of, like Harry Potter, you know, having like 10 volumes. But we just shelve them like you would shelve any other book, but it's back in the staff area. So if somebody wants one of the Braille books, a staff member has to get it.
Okay. Is there a checklist to make sure that we're looking at programming with an accessibility lens?
There are a lot of really good checklists from Project Enable. That's a really good site to check out on how to be more accessible. Let me think. ASCLA, that, you know, is now dissolved. They have a bunch of tip sheets about making your programs, documents, everything like that more accessible. So those are just some resources just off the top of my head.
I would second Project Enable, which I will drop into the chat momentarily for people to find. A lot of the checklists I can think of tend to emphasize physical space and design more than specifically programming. But there are toolkits out there geared towards it. And again, it was sort of mentioned earlier, a lot of times just ask. If you make it clear that people can ask for accommodations, you can learn along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. For interlibrary services, can you think of anything that ILS can do to meet accessibility that's often overlooked?
Well, this is this kind of sort of answers the question, but one thing that I think would be awesome would some libraries have started developing essentially make and take accessibility kits. So like they have ones for low vision, ones for reading disabilities, ones for hearing, like, you know, have like a portable hearing loop. Things like that could go through ILS from, you know, one place to another, or they could be, you know, stationed at different branches. But just having that available in your system would be fantastic.
I mean, I think cataloging through the ILS very cleanly is probably the best thing. If you are designing an ILS from scratch, first, my extreme kudos to you for what will likely be a technological marvel. More and more, because of things like the Web Accessibility Content Guidelines and some international.
I think your microphone went out.
The only other things I can think of tend to be sort of like the design of it. You know, is your ILS one that people can easily find and easily access?
Mm-hmm.
I have seen libraries that love to put their ILS as a very small text box in the bottom left of the page. It can be very hard in a left to right reading culture to find that.
Yes. So I just realized that my answer was about ILL, not ILS. Sorry about that, guys.
I think it's both useful. Thank you.
Sorry about that. My brain was just going in a different direction.
It's all useful. Another question, what should an accommodation statement sound like? Do you have an example?
Oh man. Let me see if I can find one on my desk for what our library does. Essentially what it should say is your library name is committed to following like the ADA and and making accommodation requests or accepting accommodation requests. There's plenty that you can find online that are fantastic, but I don't really have mine here. But for me, the main thing is make sure that you have an implementation.
We were getting a little bit of feedback. Kaitlyn, you may need to unmute yourself again.
Sorry about that. What I was saying was, you need to write something along the lines of, you know, in accordance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, Virginia Beach whatever library accepts, you know, accommodation requests. But the main thing is you can find any of those statements like online anywhere that are all good. None of them, I haven't seen any really bad accommodation statement, no matter what the verbiage was. It's just sometimes, you know, people prefer this verbiage over that. But for me, an accommodation statement needs to have a way to make those accommodations, like say we accept accommodation requests up to 24 hours in advance of the program. You may email blah, 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 call the branch, things like that. Ours says the 24 hours in advance of the program, I think, and it says to call the branch where the program is being held to make the accommodation request. For me, that's the biggest thing, because you have to have like an implementation plan, a way to make those requests actually happen. So that's just me.
Yeah, there's not a lot of boilerplate accommodation / accessibility statements out there. The general trend is to say, you know, our library is committed to providing patrons, users, customers, whichever term your library likes to use, with equal access to services, events, branches, and then to say, we honor these commitments in the following ways. If you'd like to make a request or an accommodation, contact this branch or this librarian at, phone, email. Some still list fax. It's generally considered good form to mention specifically that you will try when you acquire resource and technologies that you're going to do them in keeping with the ADA, the American Disability Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. But there are libraries who don't feel comfortable putting that verbiage out there because it strikes them as being a little legalistic. But at the extreme basic level, the statement you'd want is, our library, we consider these as we do things, we are open to requests, we try our best to meet them, contact us in the following ways. Like that's as bare minimum as these tend to go.
We have a few more comments in the chat. Several very good links for wavewebaim.org, the dyslexic fonts, Project Enable, also more about dyslexia-friendly libraries. Thank you, Nan. Oh, and the question did mean ILL, not specifically ILS, but both are super helpful, so thank you. And the Contra Costa County Library has posted their accessibility statement if you'd like to take a look at that. GPS and wayfinding apps link, thank you for that. I think there was a question on accessibility kits. What would you include with an accessibility kit?
Well, there's so many different possibilities. For like the low vision kit, I'd probably have an electronic video magnifier, a signature guide, a bold, they have these really bold low vision pens. There's paper that has really bold lines. Those are just some examples for the low vision kit. For the dyslexia kit, they have cover sheets, the markers to where you can cover up one line so you can focus on another. They have portable like hearing loops for the deaf kits. A really good resource is the San Francisco Public Library, because they pioneered these kits. And my library is looking into getting them as part of our strategic planning process. But they're a really good place to start, and then you can kind of go as much or as little as you want to with them.
It also will depend a lot on who you're imagining the kit's going to. Children's kits often will include a range of accessibility devices like pens, handouts, Braille bookmarks, hearing loops, aids, so forth, so on, depending on the disability, as a way of introducing, these are things that are out there that one day you may choose to use. Sometimes they can be a bit more targeted for adults depending on specific disability and the specific goal.
Great. Do we have any more questions? Not seeing anything specific in the chat yet. Just a reminder also that your state's talking books or library for the blind also may be a resource for this. We're seeing some libraries having circulating items for accessibility, as well as things, of course, for low vision. And also just a reminder, library staff are able to certify talking book service users now. So if you're not familiar with that and you have a low vision patron, please take a look. I'm not seeing any other questions. Do we have anything else for our presenters? The link in the chat to the San Francisco accessibility toolkits. Thank you.
Just because you had mentioned the Talking Books libraries, both, as it happens, both Kaitlyn and I also work as Talking Book librarians. Our systems both have those. For people who are wondering where you can find your nearest Talking Book library, I've placed the find that link in the chat. So you can take a look and see what's offered at your local one.
Excellent. Thank you.